Okay, docs, as we continue kind of the training on diagnostic testing, as you've seen, the first thing that you'll get back from the labs will typically be your blood tests. We've kind of gone over that. What I'm attempting to do here with the training on diagnostic testing is just to give you the high points so you can speak intelligently to your patients. There's no way I'm going to be able to tell you all the ins and outs of every single test. I'm trying to give you enough, kind of fast track you, enough of the high points so that you can easily speak to your patient and also have some understanding about what's going on with their system. So the next test is a saliva test, the adrenal test, the adrenal stress index. I've emailed you a copy of my latest test, the last one that I did on myself, so these are my results. So we can kind of be looking at the same thing. So while you're watching this video training, you should click on the attachment, open it up, and have it in front of you so you can understand what I'm saying. The adrenal test usually comes in one page. You'll see at the top of the page the 4 different time zones or times during the day that they collected these saliva samples: the 6 to 8 a.m. fasting sample, the 11 to noon, the 4 to 5 p.m., the 10 to midnight. Now that portion of the test, we're measuring cortisol levels. And cortisol is a stress hormone, a steroid hormone that's produced by the adrenals. Let's back up just a little bit. One of the main organs in the body that controls and regulates blood sugar are the adrenal glands. So this is why we run this test. For most diabetics, the adrenals are not working well, and it's one of the major areas that we do a lot of therapy to get them back online. But in this part of the test, we are running cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It has direct connections to blood sugar regulation. In other words, the more or the higher the amount of cortisol in the body in general, the higher the blood sugar. This is why steroid therapy, corticosteroid therapy, and prednisone and things of that nature actually can bring on diabetes. So we're looking at cortisol here at all the 4 different times. You can see with my test, the first 3 times they are depressed, the cortisol production. To the right of the words depressed, and you'll see the reference values, basically what we should be seeing. So my 6 to 8 a.m. sample was a 4, so very low obviously. My 11 to noon, again very low, the range is 5 to 10, it's at a 1. 4 to 5, 3 to 8 is the range, it's at a 1, and then I had a normal test during the 10 to midnight. The other thing you'll see is, as you see, look at the bottom of those levels, you see the words cortisol burden. And my cortisol burden came in at a 7, which is very low. And if you look further to the right, the reference range for cortisol production for a 24-hour period is between 23 and 42 units. And so when you see someone producing that low, you know the adrenal glands are very weak. Okay, so that's the first part of the test. You can gather a lot of information from this part of the test. Number one, if you look at my panel in specifics, you can kind of already judge that the adrenal glands are very weak, they're very tired, they're very stressed out. You'll see some other patterns as well. You'll see obviously some patterns where a lot of these markers, they're elevated, they're overproducing cortisol for various reasons. Number one, diabetes is a very stressful disease, causes lots of inflammation. Their diets are usually poor, they're eating food allergies. All of these stressors to the body are going to cause the adrenals to react and produce the stress hormone cortisol. So you're going to see many different patterns, and we'll come back here and touch up on some of those patterns here in a minute. But if you look a little lower, you'll see the hormone DHEA. That is produced by the adrenals, and the range, as you can see to the right, is 3 to 10. I came in at a 5, so I'm well within the range. Now the neat thing about this test is it takes your cortisol levels and it takes your DHEA numbers, and it creates a ratio. And that ratio allows this test to place the patient in one of 7 different stages of adrenal gland dysfunction. And you can see those stages right below the DHEA. Stages 1 through 7, the number 1 being adapted to stress, and then you can read through number 7 being complete adrenal fatigue. So basically what I tell patients is that when they come in at a number 1, 2, or 3, it's not that bad. It does certainly signify that the adrenals are under a lot of stress and they're responding, but the good news is that they're healthy enough to respond. Stage 7, adrenal fatigue. Stage 5, 6, and 7, typically speaking, but especially stage 7 is where the adrenals are really just very, very weak. So typically a person is going to become a diabetic in stages 1 through 4. That's when they're overproducing cortisol. Now, if they keep with the same habits and the same mechanisms are still in play, it's going to burn out the adrenals. So you're going to see a lot of your diabetics coming in at a stage 5, 6, or 7. But they more than likely became a diabetic in stages 1, 2, 3, or 4. And to the right of that, you'll see the graphical representation of where the patient is. You see the black dot in the grid there, that's in zone number 5, so it's placing my results at zone number 5, which is called non-adapted low reserves. So wherever that black box is what level of adrenal dysfunction they're in. You would like that black box to be smack dab in the middle of the reference range, basically having normal function. A lot of patients will ask, well, what number should I be? Well, you don't want them to be any number, you want them to be normal. So that's a very important part of this test. It gives you an idea of how stressed out the adrenals are, what state of function they're in, how strong they are, how weak they are, how much they're able to adapt. And it also gives you a baseline. So 30, 45 days after you begin care, you can rerun this test and actually make sure that they're physiologically improving from an objective standpoint. Some other things that you'll see if you go back up to the cortisol rhythms, and that's kind of the most important term that I want to go over here. It says free cortisol rhythm. And that's very important because the adrenals do function on what we call a circadian rhythm, which means that they should be at their highest function in the morning. They should be producing most of their cortisol in the morning, and as you go through the day, those cortisol numbers should trail off and really begin to reduce, basically preparing your body for the sleep cycle. Now, if you look to the right of those cortisol numbers, you'll see another graph. At the top of the graph, it says circadian cortisol profile. And the two dotted lines, the one that they show right on top of each other, that's kind of the control. We would actually like to see the patient right in the middle, I wouldn't say mirroring, but paralleling those controls. They should be basically starting high, dropping down, and then dropping down again, kind of like a chair. That's kind of the rhythm that you want to see. Now, if you see the black bolded line at the bottom, that's me. Those are my results. And obviously, as we talked about, the adrenals at this time for me, they were very low. So you're seeing them below the control, below the range. Sometimes you'll see that bold line way above. A lot of times you're going to see it zigzag. Okay, you're going to see the rhythms way off. So with these patients, what you'll typically see, you'll see like depressed levels in the morning. You might see depressed levels from 11 to noon, and then boom, right at 4 to 5, and especially at 10 to midnight, they're starting to spike their cortisol. So their rhythms are flipped. And one of the main reasons, and you're going to see that with a lot of diabetics, and one of the main reasons that occurs is because there's a structure in the brain called the hippocampus. It sits in the medial portion of your temporal lobe, and its job, among many others, is kind of the brake or the modulator of the stress mechanism. It kind of controls the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and kind of stops it and pulls people out of stress cycles. People who are diabetics often are suffering through hippocampal degeneration. So this structure in the brain, the hippocampus, is very rich in glucocorticoid receptors, and what that means is for a person who's running high blood sugar, it stimulates the hippocampus, it drives it, and it begins to degenerate, so it doesn't function as well as a brake or a modulator. So what happens is they begin to lose their rhythms. What you'll see symptomatically with these patients are a couple things. They won't be sleeping well. They'll tend to fall asleep at night, but they'll wake up in the middle of the night. One of the reasons they could be waking up is because those cortisol surges and those adrenaline surges at that time are really excitatory to the central nervous system, and it literally wakes them up. So that's one reason that they'll be waking up in the middle of the night. It's another reason why you'll see people with the dawn effect. Now, the dawn effect is basically a phenomenon that you see where a diabetic's blood sugar might be, let's say, 130 at bedtime, and they wake up and it's at 180. So they went through the fast